Does water like to go uphill? No. Also, if they were right, they'd have to have all that dirt somewhere because they're missing 1,000 cubic miles of dirt. Where is it? It's not at the end of the Colorado River. There's no delta at the end of the Colorado River. So they're missing their scientific evidence. Whereas we believe that actually it ripped it out of there, and the creation geologists say that the Tepete sandstone region is actually the rock that came out of there and was deposited, and now it's the sandstone in that other region. So anyway, we're going to do this real quickly because I don't want to kill you, but we only have a couple more minutes anyway, so just real quickly. After they got off the ark, it actually started the Ice Age. There really was an Ice Age. There weren't multiple Ice Ages. It's how they're misreading the rocks and the fossils, why they think there were multiple Ice Ages. And so, oh, notice the ark didn't necessarily just look like a box. It just had those dimensions that I told you, but it could have been stylized. We just don't know. We just know what the scripture tells us, which is the basic dimensions. And notice there's no trees in the picture because after the flood, it would take time for the trees and everything to reestablish themselves, wouldn't it? We know there were some trees because the dove came back with the olive branch in her beak, but it could have been a little bitty sprout at that point that was still coming up. So anyway, the Ice Age was caused by warm water and cold air. Now I want you to understand, have any of you seen, it's an old movie now, but have you seen the movie The Day After Tomorrow? Any of you? Okay, some of you have. It's, it's a sci-fi movie. We see a lot of those. Anyway, in that they were trying to give a scenario of why there would be ice ages. And in that movie, they said that there was global warming and it made a warm water current in the North Atlantic, and that caused, it came in contact with cold air and it caused this ice age, the next ice age to form on the planet. And that was what the whole movie was about, was trying to get people out of the northern part of the United States because they were freezing to death with this ice age. Okay? The whole movie was based on that. Well, what do we know from that? We know that the scientists know that the only way you can explain how there was an ice age is if you had a lot of warm water and a lot of cold air. Because an ice age requires warm water and cold air, because if it's just everything is cold, you won't get an ice age because you won't get snow and you won't get glaciers. See, if it's too cold, the air won't hold any snow. So there's got to be plenty of warm water hitting that cold air so that you get precipitation. And when you get that snow, then you can build up glaciers. And an ice age is a time when there's more glaciers than what we see today. Just want you to understand that. They don't cover the whole planet. They're just in the upper latitudes. So this part and this part would, in the land portions, would have been glaciated, and then along here it would have been lush and tropical along the equatorial region. And why would that have happened from the flood? Well, because when you open everything up like that, you have a huge amount of volcanic activity. And the volcanoes actually cause what's called the inverse greenhouse effect, where the sun's warmth is bounced back into outer space, and then the air gets cold. And I just want you to know that in 1815, there was one volcano that erupted in Tambora in the South Pacific. And 1816 is known as the year without a summer worldwide. There was actually frost on the crops the following August here in the United States. There was ice throughout the year in Hudson Bay from one volcano. So if you consider the amount of volcanic activity that happened during the flood as everything was ripped apart, that's what would have caused the air to get cold. This picture just shows you some of the extent of the effect of some of these volcanoes. And I want you to notice, these were not volcanoes that were as big as the whole western United States. These were volcanoes that threw ash and mud and rock as far as the entire western United States, or they had volcanic flows as far as the whole western United States. So these would have affected the air very readily. Also, you have warm water because the oceans were in direct contact with the mantle of the earth. That would have warmed the Earth's oceans up. Today, the Earth's oceans are approximately 4 degrees Celsius, which is around 38 to 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Kind of like fridge water, okay? Water that comes out of our fridge. Even at the equator right now, if you go down 100 feet, it's 39 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? Water is its highest density at that temperature. And so that's what it is today. During the flood, we think that the temperature went up to about an average temperature of 80 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a big difference. That's like a 40-degree difference. And in some places, it would have been up like 105, like a hot tub. Okay, so much warmer oceans. So when you have those warm oceans and that cold air, it would cause a lot of evaporation and precipitation, and it would start to snow. And if it rained, it would just give you a lot of rain and lush environments. But as you get into the areas that are farther away from the equator, it would snow and snow and snow. And that's why you see in this picture that the glaciers were in the upper latitudes, away from the equator, but they were inland in the upper latitudes. And that was the difference of the Ice Age. We see that this is a picture from a secular textbook showing you animals that lived in England during the Ice Age. Now, I don't know about you, but I look at that picture and go, Africa, right? You know, those look like African animals. That's pictures of animals that lived in England during the Ice Age. Why? Well, because England's surrounded by water, isn't it? And if you were near the water during the Ice Age, it was warm. I don't care if you were in Siberia, in the northern coast of Siberia or Alaska, during the Ice Age, it was warm because the water was warm. There was no ice cap at the North Pole at that point because the flood was a warm water flood. And so everything was warm if you were near the water, but cold if you were inland in the upper latitudes, which was very, very different. And when you have that situation, those of you that already studied weather, you know this. When you have warm water that moves with the moving of the earth and the Coriolis effect, it causes hurricanes. Well, our hurricanes today, you know, they may be 400 or 500 miles across, this 75 to 150 mile an hour winds. They may last a couple days. Well, they believe that at this time, they had, during the Ice Age, they had hypercanes. Hypercanes were the size of continents. They had wind speeds up to 500 miles an hour and lasted for weeks. Now, you guys that know me know, immediately I went, how did they know that? I mean, if you weren't there, how would they know that? Guess how they know that? The rock strata. When a hurricane goes through, it actually lays down a certain amount of rock strata. And you can tell something about the strength of the storm by how much rock strata or sand that it lays down. Those hypercanes, they can see layers that were laid down, these huge layers that were laid down. And so if they were individual storms, they were huge individual storms. Now I'm going to tell you something else. I think that's what a lot of the evolutionists are translating as separate ice ages. They see these hypercane strata and go, wow, look at that ice age. Wow, look at that ice age. We're looking at it and go, wow, that was one bad storm. Do you see the difference? And the secular scientists can't explain why there was ever even one ice age. They know they need warm water and cold air, and they can't explain why that ever happened. You and I can. Our Bible gives us the clue. Did you have a question, Owen?
Yeah, wouldn't a strong storm like that completely level continent and kill everyone?
No, that's a really good question. Think, a hurricane, when it goes through, it doesn't actually take away mountains or anything like that. It tends to move beaches and things that are easily moved, but it doesn't tend to move rock. So that's, yeah, and aren't you glad? You notice God did not land Noah and his boys on anything low. He put them in the mountains of Ararat, which was far away from the ocean, wasn't it? So that they were someplace high and inland, so that that would dissipate before it would be able to get too close to them. Wasn't a good time, though. Wasn't a nice time to be on planet Earth. There is evidence that there was water erosion. Okay, it was lush and tropical if you were near the equator during the Ice Age. If you were near the water, it was warm. If you were near the equator, it was lush and tropical. That includes North Africa, which is now the world's largest sand pit. Okay, but at this time, or the Holy Land. The Holy Land, if you go there, they will tell you 10,000 years ago, the Holy Land was lush and tropical. And today it's more deserty. Why? Well, because that's when they believe the last ice age was. So they see the same evidence we do. So during the Ice Age, those areas got a lot of rain, and that's why you're looking at water erosion in the Sahara Desert. There's water erosion on the Great Sphinx and the Pyramid of Giza. Why? Because these things were built during the Ice Age. If you know this, the book of Job was written in the Ice Age. The Ice Age would have ended around the time Joseph was in Pharaoh's court, okay? And that might be marked by the 7 years of feast and 7 years of famine that we hear about in the scriptures. That actually would fit time-wise right about where the Ice Age should have been. And why do I say that? Because scientifically, if you calculate how long it would take for the Earth's oceans to cool, which would have been the end of the Ice Age, it takes about 700 to 1,000 years. Puts us right into where Joseph was in Pharaoh's court. So that might actually be a biblical mark. And there's references in Job to something about the bowels of the ice or something like that. He actually talks about ice. So he lived during the Ice Age. This explains why when God told the Hebrews and Abraham, I'm going to take you to a land of milk and honey. I don't know about you, but I always read that reference and said, Lord, it looks like a desert to me. Okay? But they lived during the Ice Age. It didn't look like a desert during the Ice Age. It was lush and tropical during the Ice Age. So a lot of evidence to that extent, too. You know what? we're going to stop here. We're going to have to pick up on the end of this. We're going to finish the Ice Age and pick right up on how it affected man during the Tower of Babel. How's that? It'll be a natural way to just take it and go, because we're going to do ancient man tomorrow. So we will finish the Ice Age as we pick up on ancient man and dinosaurs and that kind of thing, okay? You got a feel for how the fossils work into this? How important are the fossils? They're really important, aren't they? They're really important. See, either the fossils are evidence that God already judged the earth, and then you can point to a judgment to come, or they're evidence that everything evolved and there is no God. Get a grip on that one. Yes, ma'am.
So the evolution is back to like the sediment layers. They're just saying that, you know, over millions, billions of years, just storms happen? Are they saying floods?
They said floods, storms, volcanoes.
It's just overall.
They just think the same things we do, only over long, slow periods of time, and they don't believe there was ever a world-covering flood.
For us, it was just lots of rain piled up over a number of hours and days.
Over a year. Very mean year. And the uppermost rock layers were laid down during the Ice Age. When you have storms like those hypercanes, that lays down sediment layers. And that's why I said there was the Catie boundary. That's an actual picture of a part of the rocks where it's exposed out west. You see the dotted line. That's called the Catie boundary. The evolutionists will tell you there was a huge extinction at the Catie boundary. That's when they think the dinosaurs died, blah, 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 blah. The creationists now believe that the Catie boundary is where the flood ended. And the reason, and this is so logical, and I love this when they finally came up with it, the reason is, up to the Catie boundary, all those rocks are global. Those rocks are all over the planet. What about above it? Then the rocks are just the United States. And above that, just the eastern United States. And above that, just the southern United States. In other words, the rock layers start to shrink. 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 Why? Because those were floods, local floods during the Ice Age, caused by those storms, caused by, you know, snow and then it melting, etc. Does that make sense? So I told you when I first wrote that first book, they didn't know that. And now when they finally figured this out, I was like, yes, Snoopy Dance. Oh, right. We finally know where the end of it is. And it's logical. It makes sense. Like a little kid could understand it. Yes, and that's what I need. I need it to be easy. You know? So it's not hard, is it? Makes sense. During the flood, they'd be global layers. Afterwards, they'd shrink, 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 shrink. Cool, huh? Yes?
Were there Native Americans in the United States at that time?
Definitely. We're going to talk about that next week. They came over. They walked over. That's part of this that I just didn't get time for. The Tower of Babel occurred during probably around the peak of the Ice Age, when you have all that water caught up in glaciers. What happens is it drops sea level. When they first got off of Noah's Ark, sea level was over 300 feet higher than what it is today, which means Florida didn't exist, except for maybe a bump up near Ocala. You know what I'm saying? An island. But Florida didn't exist because it was underwater, because sea level was over 300 feet deeper, because you didn't have the polar cap, you didn't have glaciers inland, so all the water is in the ocean. Then, as the Ice Age progresses, you have all this ice coming out of the ocean and being laid on the land. And what I tell the students when you guys are in physical science, you guys have done this with me, it's like taking a glass of ice water that's full and taking the ice cubes out and putting it on a plate. The water level drops. But then if you put a couple ice cubes back, it comes slightly back up. Well, what happened is when that water is taken out of the ocean and put on the land as big glaciers, sea level starts to drop and drop and drop to where sea level dropped by a full 600 feet. It was 300 feet lower than it is today. That's when Florida was huge, okay? And then at that point, we believe that's when the Tower of Babel occurred. And when God divided the nations, literally your continental shelves were exposed. So the Native Americans were with the family group that actually migrated through Asia, up through the Bering Straits and down into the Americas. And there are some really cool articles on that for homeschool moms. There's one called The 16 Grandsons of Noah, and it is amazing. All homeschool moms need that article to connect their history with their Bible. It's just amazing, and it is. It's very good. So we will talk about all this next week. We're going to deal with man next week, okay? Oh yeah, I'm sorry, it's not next week. I'm so used to class being once a week. It's tomorrow. We're going to deal with it tomorrow. Have a good day.